Mark Vandermoss has been a guest on Just Right radio program before and on our video channel when I filmed his work with the Israel Truth Week, which he created in response to all of the hatred being leveled at Israel. And he was instrumental in changing the laws of Canada with his involvement in the Caledonia affair. And some of these things I can make links to in the description of the video. But today, I'm with Mark to talk about the New Brunswick Freedom Project. Now, we're both here in New Brunswick. Mark, you moved here 3 years ago?
3 years ago.
Yeah. And I just moved here about 7 months ago or so. So we're New Brunswickers, and Mark has had a great idea that we should have a New Brunswick Freedom Project based upon the New Hampshire model, the New Hampshire Free State Project, which is 20 years in the making. So Mark, why don't you describe to our viewers what the New Brunswick Freedom Project is about?
Well, for a long time now, even before we moved to New Brunswick, I'd been wondering about the possibility of moving to a small province with a small population and realizing that it's a lot easier to change the culture in one province than trying to change the culture in 10 provinces, and then use that province as a refuge, as a place to stand and inspire other provinces and other people in other provinces to take back their freedom, to expand their freedom, and to preserve the freedom. And I'd had that thought for some time. And so we moved here. As you said, I was very politically active in Ontario, very much in the Caledonia crisis, as you alluded to. Eventually, we, or the person on the team that we worked with, won an amazing Supreme Court of Canada decision that ruled that the police were not allowed to arrest innocent people to prevent violence by third parties, even during Aboriginal land claim. The court called that actually police state. So when I moved to New Brunswick, I wasn't really planning on being very political. There was no real intention in that. And then the China flu civil rights abuses began. And all of a sudden, it seemed that we went from a free country to a dictatorship very, very quickly, to a medical tyranny. And now we have Trudeau trying to pass legislation to control online speech and then trying to criminalize free speech. And it looked like to me, based on my history dealing with rule of law failures in Caledonia, where the police were arresting innocent people instead of the people committing the crimes, that we were suddenly much further down the path of almost like a Marxist or communist cultural revolution than any of us actually believed. And so I revived this idea of what would happen if we created this, what I call a free province, that would become financially self-sufficient, not dependent, as New Brunswick is right now, on handouts from Ottawa, and we could revive the schools, restore freedom to schools, restore, protect property rights, all of the things that Canadians have valued over the years. We could at least try to protect them in one small province. And then I ran across this really neat project in New Hampshire. New Hampshire has a great tradition, of course, as being I think they're the live free or die state. So they do have a tradition of freedom, but they had this amazing thing called the New Hampshire Free State Project. I think on Twitter they're Free State NH is the sign. They have a website, and essentially it boils down to getting freedom-minded people to come to one small state and influence the politics there. It's not about creating a new political party. It's about telling the politicians that we already have, no, we're not going to suspend the civil rights based on a virus with, say, less than a 1% death rate. No, we're not going to be teaching Marxism and communism in our schools. No, we're not going to be tearing down statues. And so that's where I really was quite inspired by that. So it gave me kind of a model to shoot for. So essentially what the New Brunswick Freedom Project is the idea that we bring freedom-minded people into New Brunswick and have an influence over the politics here. Now, the why that's important, and what you think, well, why New Brunswick? Well, there's only 380,000 people voted in the last provincial election. We've had two back-to-back conservative majority governments in New Brunswick. So we have a history of being conservative at a provincial level. So in Ontario, I think there's something, 5 million votes? Something like that, 5 million votes cast. How are you going to change culture with that number of votes versus 380,000 here? So your vote in New Brunswick is actually worth 15 times what it is in Ontario. So much easier to influence the politicians. If you had even 5,000 people, you could make enough noise and pressure the politicians to do the kinds of things that we want and to stand up against the socialist bullies that are ripping our society apart. So that was the idea. And so we're just getting started.
Well, anybody who's been involved in politics knows that every great political movement is either started and is run by a small number of people. Always. Every great political movement. Even for example, the War of Independence in the United States, there was more people who fought on the side of the British than on the side of the revolutionaries, right? They were a minority and they won. And look at the result. So I can understand what you're talking about when you say that even though you may only get a few people, a few thousands of people coming into a small area like New Brunswick, that small number of people, if they are of like mind, can network and try to influence and set an agenda for the rest of the province, because that's actually what is happening in this country. You have a small clique of elitists in Ottawa or in Ontario, in Toronto, or here in Fredericton, that are running the show, that are setting the agenda, and everybody else is reacting to it. Because if you walk down the street, and it doesn't just have to be New Brunswick, anywhere in Canada, Main Street Canada, you walk down the street and talk to people about things, they're basically in like mind with us that, yes, this whole mask thing is nonsense, but I don't want to get a ticket or whatever, or I don't agree with the politicians, but what are you going to do? That kind of an attitude, right? So it's more or less people are willing to accept what is imposed upon them. And I think what you're suggesting is that you get a number of people together to, should I dare say the word, impose freedom on them?
Impose freedom. Look, I don't know if that's the right word or not.
It is the right word.
But you're absolutely right. I'm just using the example of a mere 5,000 people who were noisy and who could be committed to, who could be counted on to come out to protest at a member of Parliament's house or an MLA's constituency office and write letters. Could have a tremendous effect. Now imagine you had 50,000 over a period of time. The problem is everybody wants a solution today. They want it, okay, how do we fix this today? You're not fixing it today. But we have to realize where we are in the process here. You now have police arresting the leader of the People's Party of Canada for speaking outside to 12 people, 12 or 15 people, whatever it was, arresting him, putting him in jail, while the police in the same province are allowing radicals to pull down a statue of the Queen and arresting the one person who is there protesting. Yeah. And I understand, tasering them. Okay, so the police, we have to understand, the police are not our friends. We want them to be our friends. If it's a non-political issue, yep, they may come out and look at your house that's been broken into. They'll investigate your stolen car, although that's not even happening in areas of the States anymore. But you have to understand, I learned this in Caledonia, that the police will follow every illegal, every immoral order that they are given. If they're given an order to arrest you, despite not having broken the law, as they did in Caledonia, they will do it. In Caledonia, not one OPP officer, it's Ontario Provincial Police Officer, to our knowledge, after many years of working in there, not one of them actually refused an illegal order. Not one of them. So if the government says you will be vaccinated against your will, the police will come to your house, they will arrest you, they will take you to the hospital, and they will hold you down and force vaccinate you. Now, you may think, Mark, you're out of your mind. Really? Am I out of my mind that much? Did you ever think you'd see the day when a health officer who's unelected could tell you you're going to stay in your home even though you're not sick, you're going to wear a mask when you come out, and by the way, we're going to push you into getting a vaccine that was rushed to market, that has horrendous side effects, and then maybe we'll give you your rights back. Did you ever think that we were coming to that day?
Now, it wasn't just the COVID response that would be the impetus for this, because
No.
I think this has been brewing in your mind for quite some time, even before COVID. But the New Hampshire Freedom Project was 20 years in the making, and their goal was to have 20,000 people sign a pledge saying that once we get 20,000 people signing this pledge, I will, within 5 years of that happening, move to New Hampshire to help that state move towards freedom. What is your goal here with the New Brunswick Freedom Project?
We're just getting started. We've been operating, I think, less than a month. We've had about 200,000 impressions on Twitter. No other real marketing, but we've got a number of people signed up to the mailing list, and we've got some people that are already committed to moving. So we're just babysitting. I never talk about numbers, because one of the things that people need to understand is the number of people involved in a march. Everybody wants to ask, who showed up? How many people were there? It's not relevant. What's relevant is the number of committed people. And in Caledonia, we fought the OPP, the radical native militants, violent militants, the media, and the government of Ontario to a standstill with fewer than a dozen people that were totally committed. So I don't talk about numbers. I think when I get over 1,000 people, I'll let people know. But we're getting started, and we're going to do something. And I don't know about you, but I just got tired of whining to my wife every time I had to put on a mask. My wife, my poor wife. She's probably sick and tired of me complaining about these politicians taking our rights away. I mean, I don't even know if I'm going to be allowed to buy groceries without showing papers, and I'm not going to do it. I will not get a vaccine, not this one anyways, until the trials that are underway are over. And by the way, if you took the vaccine, you're part of the trials. And I know what the side effects are. And we already know that the side effects are horrendous. So no, it's something that's been in the back of my mind, because we can see where society's going. We can see it in the States, where you have Seattle and Portland, where you have Antifa in total control of the cities there, where the law is not enforced. You're seeing that they're not being prosecuted, or if they are charged, the charges are being dropped. You can see in the January 6th demonstration, riot, whatever you want to call it, at the Capitol. Some of those people are being still held in solitary confinement torture, whereas the charges against the leftists who were disrupting Trump's inauguration, they're all dropped. So what we're seeing is, as the left has more and more taken over the school systems, the universities, the judiciary, the legal system, we're seeing that the people like us, like you and I, are being demonized. We are expected to follow the law, and yet those using violence against us are not. They're becoming exempt. We look at the churches. I mean, at the time we're doing this, I think there's over 20 churches that have been attacked. Our Prime Minister has said nothing about those. In other words, and the media is trying to make excuses for them. In other words, if you're a Christian in this country, you're under attack, and apparently they have the Prime Minister's blessing because he's not saying anything. And so you better understand that the left is becoming more and more violent. They're becoming more violent out in the open. The police are exerting a hands-off approach to them. And yet here we are, unable to carry a weapon to protect ourselves. We have a charter right to life and liberty, and yet we don't have any means. We're not allowed to carry any means to protect ourselves or our homes. You're not allowed to have a firearm for self-defense. That's not a lawful purpose for owning a firearm, believe it or not. And so here we are being left defenseless while our judiciary is slowly creeping into anarchy and allowing these people to do whatever they want. And I'm telling people, you don't have that much time. We've got to establish a free province somewhere. Mm-hmm. And because you have two issues here. Number one is the schools. Schools are a provincial function. We have policing issues. Policing is a provincial function until the Supreme Court makes another decision and says it's not, illegally. So we have to take control of those two functions. The only way to do that is in a province. Well, if I've got to try and take control of schools or restore, I prefer to say restore schools to some level of sanity and eliminate the radical leftist agenda that's being taught to our children. I'd rather do it in a small province rather than a big one. And I think we can do that over time. But we have to get started. You have to get it's great to whine and complain on Twitter, but at some point we have to do something. Mm-hmm. And this is an option.
Now, you mentioned the arrest of Maxime Bernier of the People's Party in Manitoba. The New Hampshire Free State Project billed itself as non-partisan. In fact, the first person there elected from the Free State Project ran under the Democratic ticket. Subsequent electees were Republican. And in that country, you basically have a two-party system. There is a Libertarian Party, but it's never really polled high anywhere except maybe Alaska won. So are you nonpartisan with the New Brunswick Freedom Project, or will you throw your support behind any political leader or party that is moving in what you might think is the right direction?
Well, I don't see how you can you can be non-political. I think probably that's how they started.
No, I don't mean non-political, non-partisan.
Well, I'd see what you're saying.
Okay.
I think that you have to be nonpartisan, but very clear in what your values are and where the direction you want to go. So my goal is to establish a growing team of experts. So they'd be teachers that could help write policy and with lawyers to write future legislation. They would say, okay, this is what we want to do in the school system. This is how we want to create freedom here. This is what we want to do with the policing. Okay, how do we make sure that police are not following illegal orders or immoral orders? How do you teach that? How do you regulate that? What does that look like? I don't think that's ever been done yet. So we have to have clearly values, and the value is freedom until you start hurting someone else. That's a good place to start for a definition. This has to be fleshed out. I'm not going to be the person that's going to be organizing it all. I'll be giving some speeches and giving some advice, but I need to find people smarter than I am who can organize those topics, different topics. How do you free up the economy? How do you have freedom in the economy without abuse? How do you free up, I don't know, medicine? How do you make sure that we have, like in New Brunswick, as you may or may not know, you're waiting a long time to get a doctor here.
I still don't have one.
You still don't have one.
And as a matter of fact, they told us to expect maybe a 1.5 year wait to find a family physician.
Yes, well, we have a nurse practitioner who is very nice. I like them, but how do we make medicine freer and more available? How do you make it affordable using free market technology or methods? I don't know. Those are things that we have to discuss. What does a free province look like? All I know is it doesn't look like what we have now, because if you can, we have no checks and balances left in our system. The judges are going along with some of this insane stuff, and I've had people on Twitter say, "Oh, see, the judges say it's legal." Well, let me explain something to you. In Nazi Germany, everything that the Nazis did was legal. Okay, legality plays a role, but at some point you have to say, no, this blatantly violates a Charter of Rights, and at what point are we allowed to violate somebody's rights? Do we get to lock up an entire population because, a percentage of elderly people or people who are obese, I'm a little overweight myself, are getting sick from a virus? Is that reasonable? We have to inculcate a sense of freedom in all aspects of a province. And it's going to take some time. But one thing, I read these tweets, people are so hopeless at what they're seeing right now. They're seeing a government, like a Trudeau government, out of control financially. Is Canada going to become the next Venezuela from the printing of money? Are we going to become a Cuban dictatorship that controls speech and jails people just because somebody doesn't like what they say? Is that the direction? That's where we're going right now. We need a bulwark, a refuge somewhere that says, no, this is about freedom. In the school system, we need a university that teaches freedom. All of our kids, like when you and I went to school, I'll bet you read Animal Farm. I'll bet you read 1984. Mm-hmm. We have to get those back in the schools again. Right. And whatever it takes.
Now, New Brunswick, being new to this province, I've been looking up its provincial politics and the way they vote federally and provincially. And I'm actually surprised pleasantly at the plasticity, I think you might say, it might be the best word, of the voter. You find that they swing from Liberals to Conservative. Provincially, they have the Alliance. Fredericton, the people in Fredericton voted in a Green member to the federal parliament. So I get the impression, at least in this small province, that they are willing to move their vote. It's not like my father voted Liberal, so therefore I'll vote Liberal. It is a little bit more plastic, a little bit more flexible, the way that people put their ballot in the box. And I think that they're more willing to change. Is that hopeful for your New Brunswick Freedom Project?
Well, I think so. I didn't go into it as deeply as you did. I mean, I looked at, the last couple of provincial elections because I wanted to know, number one, how many voters were there? Okay. What it would actually take to influence, to change the results based on those numbers. And I looked at the fact that we had two back-to-back majority conservative governments. Now, do I call what we have conservative here? Large C conservative or small c conservative? No, I don't think we have a conservative government. I think we have a less bad conservative government. I think that's the, if we look at what is passed for conservative governments in Ontario and Manitoba and Saskatchewan, and here, I mean, we've probably got the least bad one.
I have to admit that when I came from Ontario, I was used to Doug Ford, a bombastic bully, a person who really is well outside of his depth and who's being led by the healthcare professionals. I shouldn't even say the healthcare bureaucrats. And when I come down here and I see Blaine Higgs, our premier, a mild-mannered, older man, soft-spoken, basically just saying things rather than browbeating the populace. Mm-hmm. Now, mind you, I don't absolve him from the tyranny that he's imposing upon everybody by locking down and the masking and the travel restrictions and all of that. Just as tyrannical as any other province, except maybe for Doug Ford's. However, again, there is in Atlantic Canada, I would say this is Atlantic Canada because I'm originally from Newfoundland, right? About 25 years before I moved to Ontario. Lived there for about more than 25 years. And I can tell you that the mindset in Atlantic Canada, to overgeneralize at a risk, is that they are very much dependent on a state. They're much more willing to listen to the government and to respect the government, which is why I think you can probably get a person like Blaine Higgs becoming premier. He's a sort of a fatherly figure, right? And people sort of go for that kind of feel, I guess, in their politics, and they're more willing to just, yes, sir, whatever you say, sir, stop beating me type of attitude towards government. I don't know if that actually would be positive or negative for what you're trying to accomplish of changing the culture here.
You know, you don't know until you do something.
True enough.
And if you had said to me 20 years ago that that we would be where we are today in Canada with the free speech attacks, I mean, you look at how they've changed the culture, but they did it slowly. But they did it through taking over the schools and taking over the teachers' unions and taking over exactly what your kids are being taught in public school, colleges, and universities. And that has to be the place to start. Then, of course, is the policing. Those are two areas of provincial. One of the things you said on Twitter I really liked, just because a fascist takes his boot off your neck doesn't mean he's not a fascist.
It doesn't make him a saint, I think I said, yeah.
Well, whatever it was, that's both are true, right? And I think that's absolutely true. We have to realize, I mean, when this is over, God willing, this is over, we can never forget what happened here today, because a model has been created. Because anything, when you talk about people in Atlantic Canada accepting what the government says, well, that was me before Caledonia. Okay, a lot of us before, 20 years ago, 10 years ago. We all said the same thing. I'm ex-military. I served in the Canadian Forces. I was on a peacekeeping mission. I wore a uniform. I swore an oath to the country. Good order and discipline, peace, order, and good government. All of that stuff. Those are the things that I grew up with. Freedom, free speech. Even our charter. Some people don't like the charter. Well, I like the charter. I like the idea of a charter. But we've now learned that the charter is utterly worthless, completely meaningless without the culture of freedom as its foundation. Mm-hmm. It's too easy for these people to pass a law and all of a sudden the charter goes away at the time we need it the most. It's outrageous. It can never be allowed to happen. So we can sit around and whine about it. We can vote PPC. Love the People's Party of Canada. I love Maxime Bernier, for example. People say, well, what about PPC? We got Okay, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can build a free province, okay? And we can vote for PPC. And we can hope that they are very successful. But let's be realistic, guys. The chances are that Justin Trudeau is going to win a majority in the next election. Very good possibility of that. Let's assume that the PPC does really well and they get to be the official opposition. We're in a country of 38 million people. How is the PPC? They may be able to blunt the worst excesses of Trudeau and the Liberals and the NDP working together and the Bloc, but they're not going to reverse the culture. They just aren't going to be able to do that. It was
Andrew Breitbart who said politics is downstream from culture.
Exactly.
And you're absolutely right. Culture has to change, but I've been tweeting out and writing and talking about the fact that culture follows philosophy.
Yes.
And that is that is something that you get from your parents, your schooling, your church, your society, where you grow up in. That's
yes.
Your philosophy comes from there. Your culture comes from your philosophy. Your politics comes from your culture. So you're right. Let's walk and chew gum at the same time. Let's go a political approach with people like the PPC or maybe Poilievre in the Conservative Party federally, individual people from any party who are doing the right thing, applaud them for doing the right thing,
yes.
chastise them for doing
yes.
wrong, and try to change a culture and a philosophy through education and organizations maybe like the Freedom
in
New Brunswick Freedom
one
Project.
province where you have a limited population and you have the maximum possibility for changing that culture over time. And so so I mean I'm all for the PPC, but let's not kid ourselves. The election's going to be over. There could be an election this fall. If that election is lost or not won by a majority PPC government, this woke revolution continues on. Then what? We can't waste a minute before we start establishing a free province. We just can't. We don't have a choice. Now, some of you think you're going to get into the states. Do you think that the Americans under this current administration, Biden administration, are going to let in patriot refugees from Canada? No, not happening. And so even if you had a Trump victory, a Republican victory, you're still probably not going to be able to get in as refugees from Canada, even though we might qualify for them. I mean, I can see the day when I'm not going to be able to travel unless I agree to give up my right to informed consent on one of these vaccines that are killing people and maiming them. Just to be able to travel. Like we could very well be prisoners in our own country. This is insanity. So I think we're stuck here, to be honest with you. And we have to start somewhere. And I started saying earlier, I see people, they're in such despair about where the country's going, and I'm so hopeless. Some people are really hopeless. And I'll tell you one thing. The one thing that cures hopelessness and fear is action. Action. Anything is better than sitting there getting up in the morning and whining and bitching about what the government's doing. I don't care if it's simply going out, and like I've got posters at NB Free, that's the website, nbfree.ca, November Bravo Free.ca. I've got some posters there, end medical tyranny. Go have them printed out, put them on some hydro poles outside your MPP's, MLA's office. You'll feel so much better. I'm about to order some signs, some banners. Come on out with me. Let's stand out there and let's send. It all starts with a single step.
Now, Canada Day was just passed, and there was this march for Aboriginals that the Premier took place in, and they canceled Canada Day in Fredericton. But what did you and your wife, Deb, do?
I followed the exact principle that I teach. Don't worry about what other people are doing. Don't talk about, truck drivers should do a strike across Canada. And don't ask people to pay a price to do something if you're not going to do it yourself. Okay? So what I did, I said, what could I do today? I don't know that many people. We're just getting started with the New Brunswick Freedom Project. You know what? My wife and I could go down into Fredericton, because that's our capital of our province, where they canceled Canada Day after the Communist Party of Canada demanded it canceled. And I said, my wife and I could go and walk down the street with some Canadian flags and go to City Hall. So that's what we did. And it was raining a little bit. We had some people come out to film it, and we met with them afterwards for a couple of hours. It was a raging success. And so action cures fear, it cures hopelessness, and we got to meet some wonderful people who, let me tell you, people who videotape are some of the best allies you can ever have.
Give a shout out to whoever they were.
It was Cross Canada Network, and a guy goes by the name of Fred, and he has a show on YouTube, and I don't know his Twitter handle offhand, but great guy, and he brought a guy named Dale. I met a guy named Dale who's a former teacher. Just great people. So people always worry about numbers. How many people were out, Mark? I don't care. What matters is that you get out and do something, and then somebody like Robert Vaughn sees you doing a vigil in front of in London for Israel, and he says, I should have that guy on my show, and then the next thing happens. You can never plan out a struggle. And that's the one thing we learned in Caledonia. Our leader, Gary McHale, taught me that. People want to try and plan out a struggle. This is exactly how we're going to have a business plan. We're going to do this and that. You never know what's going to happen that day, because on the day we marched, it's quite possible. I called the Fredericton police to let them know I was coming. I contacted the city hall, let them know I was coming. Now, I'm happy. I'm very happy to just march down the street and not be bugged. I'm just as happy if the police want to come and harass me, because then I get to put them on the video and make them famous. I'm just as happy if the town wanted to be, if the city wanted to be idiots and interfere, because then I can make them famous too. And so I never worry about things. One thing about Christian, I'm a Christian, the number one commandment after the Big Ten is don't live in fear. And I never live in fear. So go out, do what you can with the resources you have, and see what happens, and you might meet somebody. So that's what I did. I was on Canada Day. My wife and I were marching through Fredericton. Now, just down the street from us, not very far, they were doing a big gathering at the legislature that I had no idea about. Now, Canada Day, to me, it's not. I'm not trying to poke an eye in the faces, poke the eye of Aboriginal people, but Canada is far bigger than its worst mistake, or one of its mistakes. I mean, we've made a few mistakes. We turned away Jews in World War II. We started, you started residential schools. Trudeau kept them going. CBC did a promo video for them. They don't want to talk about those. We got thalidomide babies that were approved. Yeah, so let's not take the rushed vaccine. Might be a good idea to hold off pushing that thing. So we've made our share of mistakes. The question is, are we going to learn from them? We're at an inflection point where we either learn from what these tyrants did to us and did to that Charter of Rights, or we're going to go down. And I'm saying, let's give meaning to the Charter. That's what I'm about. I'm about creating a province, a free province, where we actually hold up the Charter and say, okay, what does it mean when it says, what does it actually mean when it says you have the right to life? What does that mean? Does an unborn baby have a right to life? I don't know. I think so. Does it mean that you have the right to defend yourself against a criminal who attacks you with a knife by pulling out your concealed weapon and defending yourself? I don't know. I want to talk about it. I want to have that conversation. How do we give meaning to every word in that document? That's what I'm about. Do we allow police to decide that we're going to arrest a politician who's speaking outside to a handful of people, but we're going to let these people pull down the statue of our queen before we even pass legislation about this? Is that what that means? What does freedom of speech mean? We're going to let them pull down the statue. That's freedom of speech. But if you say something mean on Twitter, that's a hate crime? We got to have those conversations. And we have to give teeth to every word. But the only way we can do that is if we're in control of the legislative process through influence. So that right now, the conservative people, like my MP's a nice guy. He sends me nice brochures.
Oh, they're all nice people.
They're all nice people. But do you think he said word one about the massive civil rights abuses in our country right now? No, because he doesn't have to. Nobody's calling him and standing outside his office, although I will be soon, and saying, excuse me, the Charter of Rights means something. We think it means this. You need to do something about it. And the only thing, like Gary McHale in Caledonia used to say, the only two things politicians fear is being embarrassed or losing power. And our goal would be to do both. Because we have to create a refuge. And if we don't, we're going to lose it. Because, the Free State I plagiarized this from the Free State, said, is it easier to destroy socialism in one state or in 50 states? I say it's easier to destroy socialism in one province rather than 10. That's where I want to go.
Well, my fire has gone out, but it looks like yours is just started.
You got me going.
So come down to New Brunswick. I'll buy you a moose head, and we'll start some freedom down here. Thank
Awesome.
you, Mark.
Thank you so much, Robert. As always, I just want to say thank you for all of the work that you do. I know you've recorded Maxime and Salim and all of the people who are out there in the world fighting for freedom. And I think you've probably interviewed most of them. And I'm absolutely grateful and honored to be on with you.
Thank you, Mark. We do what we can. Thanks very
And
much.
by the way, New Brunswick is awesome. It's
really
beautiful
is.
here.
It really is. The
It really
beautiful,
is.
and the people are so friendly.
You come here, you're never going back. Never going back. It's beautiful. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark.